Welcome to Larry Reidy's America. This is episode Q16 of my book, and let's get started. I was working a lot, so the Holiday Rambler was not being used so much. We sold it, and I bought a GMC motorhome. My company owned it, and I rented to friends and people that I knew from the business. The motorhome was a good investment for the business, and we still used it for vacation. We also used it for Cincinnati Bengal games. I had a pass to park at the stadium. So, yeah, this is not in the book, but it was right on top as you go over the bridge. We had to walk maybe 30 feet to go in an entrance for our seats. Two memorable holidays with the GMC were our Maine and Florida trips. We spent most of one of our Florida vacations in Key West. I had purchased a GMC from Greninger Oldsmobile, and after about 45 minutes of telling Stan Greninger that I wouldn't pay any money over my original offer, he capitulated. When I picked up the motorhome a few days later, Stan gave me a tour of his facilities. When he showed me the parts departments, I asked him how much money he was losing in this department. Stan said he wasn't sure if he was losing money in parts because he was having accounting problems. I told him somebody was stealing parts and was probably the parts manager, possibly his assistant, or both were involved. He laughed and asked me how I could assume that without knowing anything about his business. I wonder who had the keys to the building besides himself, the general manager and the sales manager. He said the service manager and parts manager also had keys. I asked him if he didn't think it was unusual that cases of spark plugs, starters, and alternators were stacked by the rear door. I suggested that he should have an audit done immediately by a CPA and have the local police watch the back door for a few nights. The review showed $50,000 missing over 2 years, and an arrest was made, but Stan never told me who the thief was. Back to business. My accountant advised me to incorporate, so in October 1970, I became a corporation. I might as well go through the unfortunate events first. The worst day of my life was an elder student who worked for me at Queensgate Shell was killed by some asshole. After 6 p.m., we had a policy of credit card or exact cash. The boy was killed for $13. 3 months later, the killer was murdered in prison. Another terrible event is when Bob, my employee who worked the midnight shift, was pistol whipped and robbed. The following night, Bob's replacement said he was robbed. This was a bullshit report. When the police called me, I told them to call Detective Frank Sefton, and I would meet him at the station. This asshole, Gilbert, I can't remember his last name, faked a robbery to steal money and product. Frank arrested him. He was convicted and sent to prison. A few months later, some minister called me and asked me to put in a good word for Gilbert so he could get parole. I told him that the prick should be executed. A part of my expansion was buying 3 service stations and 2 tire stores from Wayne Francisco, who was a crook. After the deal was consummated, I discovered that he was moving inventory from one station to another station and hiding money owed to Uniroyal and Goodyear as tire stores. I hired Dan Hiller the previous year as my vice president. Dan was a school teacher who decided to go in business and operate a Shell station in Lowell, Massachusetts. Dan was a smart bulldog and was a great friend. Dan was our son Rich's godfather. I sent Dan to Arizona with a reduced check was my last and final offer to Francisco after we found the manipulation of the inventory and the bills from Goodyear and Uniroyal. Francisco accepted the check after pulling a gun on Dan and threatening to kill him. The guy who managed the tire store bought them and assumed the debt. Francisco also tried to hire a hitman to kill me. The police set a trap to catch him, but he went back to Arizona, and there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. I will come back to business later. We enjoyed spending time in Batesville. One morning while I was reading the Cincinnati Enquirer, I saw an ad for acreage for sale in Batesville. Nancy and I made an appointment in the fall of 1968 with a real estate agent to see the location and walk the 41 acres. The land was not impressive. It was recently timbered with a lot of deep crevices, and apart from the excellent road frontage, a piece of property that I wanted to walk away from. The realtor told us the price for 10-acre tract was $10,000 or $38,000 for the entire 41 acres. I told him that we weren't interested, and he said, make me an offer. I said, okay, I would go $9,000. He asked for what tract I had in mind. I told him for the proposal was for the entire parcel. He told me I was crazy, so that ended the conversation. 6 or 7 months later, I received a phone call from the realtor, and again, the conversation went nowhere. He told me his client was anxious to sell the property that we looked at and would accept a reduced price of $28,000. I replied that I might be willing to go as high as $12,000. He said that I was out of my mind, at which point I reminded him that he called me, and by the way, I still thought the property was a pig. Several months later, he called me again, and this was the most excellent deal ever. He said his client was willing to sell the 41 acres for $22,000. I was getting tired of his harassment, so I responded with a final offer of $15,000, but gave him 24 hours to accept or reject it. In no uncertain term, I advised him if he rejected the offer, never to call me again. They took the offer. So in the fall of 1970, we purchased 41 acres 4 miles from Batesville in the metropolis of Ballstown. Nancy and I were able to take a few long weekend getaways. One year in February, we went to Jamaica. It was cold in Cincinnati, but 87 degrees when we arrived in Jamaica. As soon as we checked in at the resort, we went deep sea fishing. I had a terrible sunburn after about 4 hours at sea. That evening, while Nancy was enjoying an excellent buffet dinner, I hit a little jello and slept in a chair that night with the head resting on an ottoman. It was an enjoyable few days, but we were afraid as soon as we got home that Nancy was going to have a miscarriage. She had one before Matt was born and one after he was born. I'm going to get back to business because some of the events that happened would be life-changing. I'm starting with the budget rent-a-car fiasco. Simon Ackerman was a budget rent-a-car franchisee in Cincinnati. I was one of 4 satellite operations. Simon approached me about taking over his downtown location because he wanted to semi-retire. He had an agreement with Charlie Snyder to take over an off-airport location. The profit loss statements for a downtown location looked good, so we consummated the deal. About a year later, Snyder had an interesting proposition for me. He leased a large tract of land by the airport and was obtaining bank financing for airport parking. His idea was if Simon went along with the proposal for me to take over the budget rent-a-car off airport and move it to his parking business, it would be cost efficient by splitting personnel wages. Simon agreed, and with the move, we now have an off-airport downtown and Queensgate location. I hit 150 automobiles in the fleet that we flipped every 6 months. Initially, everything was very smooth and very profitable until Schneider got sticky fingers. The stealing occurred over several months. Dan Hiller and I noticed that the profits in cash contracts were substantially lower than the previous year. To make a long story short, I had the thief arrested at his home, moved the cars back to the original location, talked to Simon to get him back into the business because I felt with my other companies, litigation would be time-consuming and detrimental to budget. Schneider had a lawyer who was connected, and the grand jury did not indict him. We had to pursue civil action, and after lawyer deposition, I was advised to take the offer on settlement so I would not neglect my other businesses. Schneider was a piece of shit. I enjoyed my time with Budget Rent-A-Car, and some of the people that I met through the business, one of our customers was Jerry Springer. When he was a Cincinnati councilman, I was at downtown location a couple times when he returned his rental. When I asked him if he had any parking tickets, he would go to the glove compartment in his rental and usually had 2 or 3. He was a nice, quiet guy, not like his TV image. Another day, he stopped by to see how business was going for the week. That I stopped by to see how business was going for the week. The girl working the counter asked me if I would pick up a customer at hell because all our drivers were committed. So I picked up Maury Wills, the great shortstop and base dealer for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was a nice guy and offered me 4 tickets for the game for the Reds that evening. It was the spring of 1977 when my ties with Budget ended. Okay, we're going to go out with the national anthem. We're at about 13 minutes, so let's do it. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And I will talk to you on the next podcast.